Once again, Penn State loses to Ohio State, this time 20-13 in Beaver Stadium. Nothing changes. Nothing is different. At least not right now.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. And a live recap here of Penn State versus Ohio State. 20-13, the final. It feels like insanity, right? Because nothing has changed. Aside from the 2016 win, Penn State under James Franklin is now 1-10 against Ohio State. 1-9 going into today, now 1-10 in the last 11 games against the Buckeyes. And frankly, it took a miracle to beat the Buckeyes in 2016. Recap the game. I encourage people to contribute their thoughts down in the comments, and we'll talk about that in the upcoming segment after a break. So have a discourse, dialogue with all of you. But just to sum up the game, is that Ohio State is still overall the more talented team. And I tried saying that leading up to, I am the Locked On Nittany Lions host, but I still want to look at these games as neutrally as possible. And every stat, every analytic, and just the eye test, Ohio State checked all the boxes. And I'm looking at the key matchups, and I'm thinking to myself, Ohio State is just, they're the better team on paper. And the only reason they are 6-1 is because of a 1-point loss to Oregon that is another perennial Big Ten championship, college football championship contender. So Ohio State, it is better. That's not a defeatist thing. Maybe you look at it that way, fine. But Ohio State is better than Penn State. But there was still an avenue for Penn State to win this game. There were multiple avenues to win this game for Penn State. Penn State had, I'm not going to blame the refs here, but had some calls not go their way. They were 50-50 calls. James Franklin acknowledged that. They didn't go their way, fine. But you get down inside the 5-yard line, not once, but twice. You get down deep into the Ohio State red zone. You throw an interception before the end of the first half, if you're Drew Aller, and I don't even know that's an interception. Trey Wallace has the football and gives it to Igbenison, essentially, or Igbenison takes it away from him. That's an elite play. An elite playmaker makes an elite play like that to prevent Penn State from even getting a field goal. That's a turnover. That ends the half. Penn State could have ran more plays. And the defensive back for Ohio State saves the day. But then you get down there at the 5-yard line, right? And Penn State can't punch it in running the football once, twice, 3 times. And then you get as close as you do because Penn State kept inching their way progressively. And I'm thinking, okay, another 4th and goal run. I know it hasn't worked this time, but maybe the 4th try is the 4th time's a charm here. You have a 6'5" quarterback. I know he's banged up, but this is the Ohio State game. You have Katron Allen. You have Tyler Warren. Run something inside the 2-3 yard line here because you kept getting closer. You kept pushing Ohio State's defense, and you go with a pass play. They were going to Tyler Warren originally. Ohio State was all over that. I think they double covered him there. They knew that, okay, if Penn State's going to score on this play on a passing play, they are not going to Tyler Warren. The second option was to Khalil Dinkins. Maybe you could argue again. Some people are going to argue that the refs did not have their best day. That's fine. Penn State still had the opportunities. You cannot hang your hat on how the refs are going to call a game. And Penn State had 2 opportunities inside of the Ohio State 5, and you come up with 0 points as the offense. The defense did everything that it could. The defense did everything in its power for Penn State to win this game. 20-13. That is a top 5 Ohio State offense. That is a top 5 Ohio State defense. The defense acted like it for Ohio State. The offense didn't because Penn State's defense stepped up. Penn State's defense even scored 7 points. They scored more than the offense in this game at home in Beaver Stadium. What's frustrating about all this, it's not the fact that they get down into the red zone. That's the frustrating part too. But they were so close. They had the opportunities. You have a pick six. Your defense plays lights out, even missing a key contributor in Deni Dennis Sutton. And I get it. Deni Dennis Sutton played, but obviously wasn't himself. He played selectively on pass rushing situations and did not play to his fullest ability, is my point. Your defense is still missing KJ Winston, and they held this Ohio State offense that went out to Oregon and scored over 30 points and should have honestly won that game. You change a couple plays there, they were in position to win. They did not close out. Penn State was in position to win today against Ohio State and did not close it out. The offense let down this team. Andy Kotelnicki, Mike Yurcich. I am not going to sit here and say that it is Andy Kotelnicki's fault. It had nothing to do with the play calling. Tom Allen and Andy Kotelnicki did call the games of their lives. They came up with the game plan of their lives for this Ohio State game. I hate to say it, but it's on the players. The players did not execute. When you are inside the 5, Andy Kotelnicki cannot run the ball in for you. And the difference a season ago, yes, Mike Yurcich wasn't as good of a play caller as Andy Kotelnicki, but the same things. It's funny because well, it's not funny, it's ironic. It is ironic that Penn State lost the exact same way it did a season ago to Ohio State and to Michigan. The wide receivers, the secondary, the offensive line. Tom Allen and Andy Kotelnicki have done a good enough job scheming those inadequacies of those position groups, but it's going to show up when you play teams that are just naturally going to give you mismatches. So Penn State's a really good team. Penn State is a great team, but they are not elite. You are not elite when your offensive line is allowing too much pressure. You are not elite when your wide receivers cannot get open in one-on-one coverage. Mike Yurcich was blamed for a lack of creativity in play calling, and that is true because a Mike Yurcich-led team in 2024 does not win the USC game. An Andy Kotelnicki offense does, but still, I've even said this in the past, no matter if Jesus himself was offensive coordinator, right? A miracle worker. Andy Kotelnicki can only do so much. If your wide receivers are not getting open, if your offensive line cannot protect without additional help, without the running backs staying in, you are playing within a phone booth. Mike Yurcich dealt with the same things, but he couldn't scheme around it. Andy Kotelnicki can only scheme so much around it. He put together a great game plan, and the offense couldn't convert. I'd understand if Penn State's offense couldn't sustain drives or couldn't get in a position to score points, but it is the fact that the defense outscored the offense today. That makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. Well, it does because the offense still has its shortcomings. The wide receivers are better, but they're better compared to 2023. But close only gets you so much, right? Penn State was close, but does that matter? Does that matter at the end of the day? A win is a win, a loss is a loss. But that is why Penn State lost this game to Ohio State. Ohio State overall is still better. When Ohio State needed a play, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, those guys were open. Those guys made plays when they needed them most. Will Howard too, especially down the stretch. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson regained their form because they were pretty limited in the past couple of games. The Ohio State's, and that's why I compare it to Michigan of last year as well. This game felt eerily similar to Michigan. Was it exactly identical? No. But Penn State was in it, and they would get so close, and then Michigan would turn them away, and then eventually, no, it wasn't 30 consecutive runs, but Ohio State at the end of the game was able to just say, we're going to run the football, and you can't stop us. And that happened once again. That's not on the defense. The defense played an all but perfect game. They did everything in their power to keep this game close. And it was. And like I said, ball bounces a different way. Penn State's, that should have been a tie game. Penn State should have scored at the end of the first half. It should have been a tie game 20-20, and then Penn State's in a position to kick a game-winning field goal or a game lead-changing field goal to make it 23-20. And then that's how it goes. And they ultimately win the game. I don't like the idea of Penn State fans storming the field if that was even a possibility. I heard that was discussed. I wouldn't have, I get it. Penn State has not won since 2016, but this is a top 5 matchup. Well, what's the point of discussing it because Penn State did not win. So nothing changes here because the same problems that hurt them in 2023 showed up again in 2024 against the competition that could exploit that. Ohio State is where it is for a reason. The only difference is they lost to 1 point on the road to Oregon. And that's why I say nothing changes in the present, because I'm going to talk about this more. We're going to check out the comments section, get your feedback, your thoughts, any questions that you might have. But by no means am I saying fire James Franklin. This is not Andy Kotelnicki's fault. This is not Tom Allen's fault. I think the coaching staff actually put together a really good game plan collectively. At some point, the players do need to execute, and I think that's what happened today. Is that Ohio State's players executed enough, and Penn State's players did not do that enough. Now, where it can be different, because it's insanity. Penn State is still sticking with the same system, but they're not beating Ohio State. However, this team can be different. We're going to talk about that more and check in on your comments on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Our friends at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime. It would have been nice if Penn State and Ohio State went to overtime. But that is why 5 Hour Energy created the Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot made just for super fans like all of us, the fans who are first in the parking lot, who are last to leave. We see you. You know what gave me a little bit of fan fuel, honestly, from Penn State, was a Zion Tracy pick six. That's Zion Tracy's first career interception, sets the tone early. It's inconsequential at the end of the day, but that was an electric play, and Beaver Stadium was literally shaking. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long, and that's why the limited edition Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com and shipped nationwide. Okay, let's check in on the comments. Appreciate everybody joining this live episode. And we'll start off with this. Big Ten Spirit, right? Judkins was a fumble. Absolutely was. So I'm glad we get to pick up with this. I stand by the fact that was absolutely a fumble. Well, he didn't have possession. Judkins made the catch. He secured the football and took 1, 2, 3 steps, then turned to make a football move to embrace whoever, he doesn't know what defender. That's Cam Miller. That's an elite play by Cam Miller, right? That should be a difference. That dictated the outcome of this game, right? Ball doesn't bounce a different, but you can't, elite teams don't need the refs to win games, okay? Penn State's a great team, not an elite team. We're back to this. But Quinshon Judkins absolutely fumbled the ball. He caught it. He secured it. He was transferring the ball. He was transferring the ball from one hand to the other to have better secure of it, which led to a fumble. That was a catch, and that was a football move. By definition, how is that not a fumble? And they called, what's even more interesting is the fact that the referees called this a fumble on the football field. If I'm not mistaken, this was a fumble on the football field with a clear Penn State recovery. You got to go with the call on the football field. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a fumble. A.J. Harris recovered it. Cam Miller caused it, and that obviously swung momentum. I think based on that play, Ohio State was able to kick another field goal in that instance. That came early in the fourth quarter, I think, now that I'm remembering correctly. But that would have changed momentum. Penn State then they wouldn't have been playing from behind as much, right? But that's one play. But that was clearly a fumble. Anybody disagrees, contribute your thoughts down in the comments section. Lex Rex. Can Penn State recover mentally after this loss? I mean, that's where my point about how things can change. They're not changed. They're not any different in the present, but they can change in the future. this team can break the trend of 10-2 teams. They're better than Washington. They're better than Minnesota, Purdue. Do I even need to mention Purdue or Maryland? But those are the two games. Like, okay, Washington, people might, I think a majority of people are going to look at Washington because they have 4 losses. They're struggling, but that is a talented team. A team that really doesn't have a lot to play for. If they're bought into Jed Fish as the head coach, I would not sleep on that Washington team in a week from now. They still have a really good defense, and Penn State mentally, right? That's the question. Can they recover mentally after this loss? I would hope so, because this is a veteran team. Second-year starting quarterback, 2 third-year starting running backs, Julian Fleming, a defense that's loaded with veteran talent, Zane Durant, Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, Devon J. Thomas. The list goes on and on and on and on, right? This isn't a relatively new, like this isn't a young team anymore. This isn't an inexperienced team anymore. These guys have logged a lot of snaps in college football. I would like to think so, also because they are better than the rest of the opponents that they play. Finish 11-1. You host a college football playoff game if you do that, but it also helps that this is a home game. If they had to travel on the road, it would be difficult. It also helps that you have a whiteout. You have the whiteout game. So the energy is still going to be high, but that doesn't fix everything. That doesn't cure everything in this case. For Penn State, they're in a good, but that 2017 had Trace McSorley, had Saquon Barkley, Mike Gesicki, right? And that was the best team of James Franklin's tenure, and even they couldn't do it. But yeah, you look at the circumstances of that. I could do a 30-minute podcast on Penn State, Michigan State circa 2017 because how messed up that game was. With the weather delay, Penn State had built a lead, then went into the locker room, and then they were fed pizza and Chick-fil-A, right? So that was an exception, not necessarily the standard. But they got to avoid the 10-2 team. And they can. And that's why I'm saying things can change, because this team is built differently. The previous James Franklin teams would have lost to Wisconsin with Drew Aller not being available for the second half. Previous James Franklin teams would have lost to USC. That's why a good number of people that have the more of a national take on college football, the college football experts, if you will, said that Penn State would go 8-4. They'd lose to West Virginia, USC, Ohio State. And that didn't happen because Penn State is built differently for the season, so they can push that trend to the side and go 11-1 and host the college football playoff game. The season's not over. Season's not over for Penn State. That's kind of my other point here, based on what we get through with the comments here in the second segment. Speaking of Jesus, I hope people are paying attention to. We'll keep politics out of it, and we'll keep. This is a sports conversation, okay? We'll keep everything social, political out of this. Steven, Penn State is mentally soft. I'm so sick of the unsportsmanlike penalties. Why did the defense look like the way that they always looked, and they could not get lined up? James Franklin owned up to that. James Franklin had said that the team isn't disciplined, or the way that it is. Unfortunately, Elliott Washington, tic-tac type of call, I guess. For Penn State, the penalties are an issue. They lost the penalty battle. They could not capitalize on the turnovers, or I guess in this case, they were equal in the turnover battle, right? I mean, you turn Will Howard fumbles at the goal line. It's kind of stuff like that. That's why I say Penn State had the avenues to win, and they would not capitalize. Ohio State would capitalize on Penn State mistakes. Penn State would not capitalize on Ohio State mistakes. That was the difference. So what happens? A third down stop, Elliott Washington gets flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct right in front of the referee. Whether you agree or disagree with the call, it was close enough to where it caught the ref's attention. And in this kind of game, you mean to tell me that they're not going to be quick to throw a flag on that? So you just have to be careful. And that's not a veteran player. And coaches and veteran players have to hold Washington accountable in that case. Our most impressive win of the year will be Illinois. Even at 11-1, how is this considered elite? When do we say we've had enough of Franklin? He's proven he can't take the program to the next level. I mean, there's a lot of layers to this, right? What is the next level? Because if Penn State goes 11-1, that is the next level. Penn State goes to the college football playoff game, hosts the playoff game, and They win, hypothetically, that's the next level. Getting to the national championship isn't easy. I agree that, okay, so it depends on how far you're grouping the levels. Are they Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, right? Those are the first teams that are going to come to mind. Are they that good? Are they that elite? No. Do I think they have elements that can get them there? And with the right matchup, they can, like, I genuinely believe they can get to the college football playoff. They host a home game, they win that game. And depending on who they match up against on a neutral site, they could win. Like, I think they're better than Miami. I think they would beat Miami in a hypothetical college football playoff game, but it is the Georgia, it's Ohio State Part 2, Oregon. Those are the teams that there is a gap that Penn State. But again, we saw this. Like, Penn State is its own worst enemy. They could have beaten Ohio State today. They got down inside the 5. Close only matters in horseshoes. I understand that. But don't think that there's this wide margin of error between Ohio State and Penn State anymore, or even those other teams. Penn State would be an underdog. Penn State would most people would pick a Georgia or a Texas, and so would I. It's why I picked Ohio State to win this game close. That game was close, even though it's a 7-point deficit. Even though it's a 7-point deficit, that game was very close. It came down to a goal line stand at the 2. And whether you want to debate it or not, a pass interference against Khalil Dinkins. So that's how close it was in that case. The main issue is the lack of recruiting explosive wide receivers. That's a part of it, right? I think there's a lot of elements here to all of this. Penn State's in a situation where they're recovering from Ohio State is able to recruit the way it recruits because they have Brian Hartline, which has been consistently developing talent. Penn State has kind of had a revolving door, more or less, at the wide receivers coach and hasn't exactly had stability. I mean, they ended, and names blanking my mind. Oh my goodness. Taylor Stubblefield. They had Taylor Stubblefield come in, and Taylor Stubblefield was not recruiting well enough, and that's why they went and got a Marcus Higgins. And Marcus Higgins needs to be able to prove it before those other high-end 4-star, I don't know about a 5-star wide receiver, gets into the fold. I don't know. But that is the difference. Ohio State has Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka. Penn State is, I've said this for the past 2 years, they are a Marvin Harrison Jr. type of player away from being elite. Penn State only has Tyler Warren as that differential playmaker. Ohio State has Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, and Penn State limited them. Carnell Tate. I thought the wide receivers to an extent would take over, and they didn't. Did they make plays when it came to crunch time? Yes. Did they make plays when they needed them, when they mattered most? Yes. But none of them took over the game. Kudos to Penn State's defense, but doesn't matter enough, right? Because they didn't get a win. Doesn't matter that they limited them, that Jeremiah Smith was quiet. You should give Franklin an extension. And then you follow it up with, is it ever Franklin's fault? I say it's an uphill battle for James Franklin. He is not impervious to any of this. Like, he is not irresponsible. Like, he can't just throw up his hands and say it's somebody's fault, it's somebody else's fault. But you were formally working with an athletic director that said, okay, you can have this, but you have a budget, right? For the first time in James Franklin's tenure, he was able to go out and get the coordinators that he wanted. Manny Diaz, Tom Allen, Andy Kotelnicki. They got into a bidding war for Andy Kotelnicki and they won. That wasn't their third, fourth, fifth choice down the list. They were able to go and outbid an Oklahoma, for example, to get Andy Kotelnicki. That was their top coordinator on the board going into the offseason. Tom Allen, once he became available because Indiana fired him, was the top coordinator that James Franklin wanted to go after. So you were working. They always said Penn State was James Franklin was always kind of working against a system. Those things matter. The facilities matter. Those little things like the nutrition bar, those things matter. The local area matters. It is a lot. It is more difficult, and it's not because I'm trying to insult the area of State College, but it is easier to recruit players to Columbus or Los Angeles or Ann Arbor versus State College, which is tucked away in central Pennsylvania. Parts of Texas. That's going to be more appealing to football players. And that's going to be more appealing to just about a lot of different potential student athletes. So James Franklin is working against a lot of things, and I think James Franklin and the coaching staffs have gotten progressively better. I do think this is one of the better staffs in his entire tenure. I think the second closest is the 2017 team, which had Joe Moorhead and Brent Pry starting to come into his own. He was still relatively new as a defensive coordinator, but starting to figure it out. This is one of the better coaching staffs that he's ever put together. But you still have to win at the end of the day. That's what again, wins and losses matter. Not, oh, well, it was a moral victory and they're closer to Ohio State. None of that matters, right? None of that matters. But to flip it around, who does everybody want? Penn State fans, specifically. Who do you want as a replacement for James Franklin? What coach can fix NIL issues, any facility issues, recruiting to State College, right? I think James Franklin does a pretty good job of selling State College in central Pennsylvania as a potential home to somebody for 3 to 4 years. What also impresses me is that it isn't free agency overnight. All these players aren't hopping into the transfer portal. Like Penn State there's nobody opting out in the middle of the season. Imagine the storm and the criticism that would be justified if a player said, I'm done. I played my 4 games. I'm preserving my red shirt and entering into the transfer portal. That is an afterthought because of the way that James Franklin runs this program and recruits. Like, the players are bought in. The players are bought in. They took it really personally with the booze and stuff because they know that's directed at James Franklin. And they called that out. They're like, that's our coach. Like, we'll do anything for him. There are, other than maybe like 1 or 2 select players, everybody that I've spoken to and the sense that I get from the players that first originally committed to James Franklin in 2014 all the way to the present, they're all for him. And that's why you see an Olu Fashanu or a KJ Hamler. I could name player after player after player that visits when they have time. Jair Brown's in San Francisco and flew all the way across the country for this game. Makes sense for Olu Fashanu, who's in New York and in New Jersey area, and it's more or less a 4 or 5 hour drive. Jair Brown on his bye week could be doing a lot of other things, but decides to fly 6 hours across the country to show up at a game. There's a reason for that. Look, under Franklin, they will always be a good team, not great, as Franklin has said. Look at Franklin's record against top teams, pathetic. They need a top coach. It is really, and it really is the only answer. Okay, who do you get? Who do you get? Nick Saban's not coming out of retirement. Are you going to get Kirby Smart away from Georgia? Are you going to get Ed Orgeron? I really don't want to hear the debate about Urban Meyer. I don't think Urban Meyer fixes any of these issues, especially with how long he's been out of the coaching game. Do not go get Urban Meyer. So who do you get? Do you start over with a relatively rookie head coach that has not led a Power 4 program? And there are levels to Power 4. There is a difference between leading, trying to think of a smaller program here off the top, because Penn State is a top 10 brand. There is a difference between leading any other football program in Power 4 or Group 5 versus, so let's, like a South Florida, for example. I think Alex Golish is a good coach, but there's a difference between leading South Florida, where there's little to no expectations and little to no pressure other than, hey, remain competitive and put butts in seats, whereas you have to represent a top 10 brand like Penn State. And that is difficult to do. There are only select coaches. if James Franklin were to ever leave, I've said this, the only coach that would probably work out the best is Matt Rule. But I don't know that Matt Rule is better than James Franklin, even with Penn State backing him. But that is the only one, because I like available coaches. I like available coaches that are looking at this as a destination job and not as a stepping stone. Matt Rule, born and raised in State College, played football at Penn State. And we've seen that he succeeded at Temple. Other than the Carolina Panthers, that is its own problem. That's a systematic problem in the NFL. But he succeeds everywhere he goes at the college level. Would Penn State be able to build him up enough to get him a national championship? I don't know, because he'd be dealing with the similar issues that James Franklin has to deal with, and he can't fix them because he's just a head coach. He's not everything. Did anyone ask Franklin what the punishment will be for 2 personal foul calls that literally lost the game for us? That's an interesting question. I don't think so, actually. I think I talked to Devon J. Thomas about accountability. He says it starts with the captains and the seniors first. And then it kind of, like, they have to set the example that they can't. So no, to answer your question, but in terms of accountability, there will be accountability as far as based on what the veteran players have said. Franklin is a good coach. Penn State is lucky to have him. As a Buckeye fan, Ryan Day has to go. Man. See, that's the thing. Ohio State, there are select Ohio State fans that complain about Ryan Day. I don't understand. It is tough to win in college football. Kirby Smart is the only one that has it figured out to this point, right? There's really, maybe Oregon's got it figured out with Dan Lanning, but they still have to prove it, right? When push came to shove, and that was supposed to be, they were 10-point favorites. Washington, a season ago, Washington handled them not once, but twice. So I still need to see Dan Lanning prove, okay, outside of Ohio, like Ohio State is a step in the right direction, but that was a 1-point game, and Ohio State could have easily won that game had they changed some play calling. I put Chip Kelly, that's responsibility falls on Chip Kelly in that game. I'll get back to the comments. We need to take another break on this live episode, but when we return, we will address the comments again and finish up talking about the remainder of Penn State's season here on a live edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can continue to have big returns on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, as you get ready to tackle with NFL action over at FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5. Bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. That is FanDuel.com. Just visit them today. If you look over at FanDuel, the lines, the odds are not posted for Penn State versus Washington. If I had to take a guess, I would say Penn State is at least a 10-point favorite. Maybe it pushes into 13 or 14 points, but I think 10 points is safe. If you're looking to bet on Penn State, there are lines available to win the College Football Playoff Championship at plus 2,000. If you like those odds, all you got to do is go over to FanDuel.com. And again, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first bet of $5. That is FanDuel.com. All right, we'll go back to the comments section. I hope that I didn't lose my spot here in the comments. All right, pick back up. If Penn State wins out, they will be in the playoff. They lost by a few points in a close game against the Buckeyes. And they could have won this game. The committee is I think it's interesting that people have said to me that, if Penn State's 11-1, it's not a guarantee. No, it is a guarantee. Let's be honest. Penn State gets into the playoff as an 11-1 team. Where they are ranked, that is left to be said. But I think with the way the seeding is, 5 through 12, 5 through 8 gets a home game. If Penn State's 11-1 with its lone loss to Ohio State, which will most likely be in the Big Ten championship game, I expect them to beat Indiana. And then Oregon, so they get a rematch with Oregon. Heck, they might even play each other 3 times. Oregon and Ohio State, who knows? But that will be, they'll look at that game and say, oh, you lost to a top 5 college football playoff contender, college football championship contender, Ohio State, by 7 points, and you were close. You could have won that game. You should have won that game, frankly. That's how the playoff committee will look at it if Penn State goes 11-1. I think that's good enough to get them ranked maybe as good as 6th. It depends what other teams do, right? Because now when you lose games, you don't control your own destiny. Penn State is going to rely on other teams like a Miami, like other teams to have a loss that they shouldn't have, lose games that they shouldn't be losing, and then that's how they benefit and jump back up the rankings. But if all things are kind of equal, I expect Penn State to maybe be the number 7 team in the college football playoff. At 11-1, they stay there. They maybe move up a couple spots depending on who loses, but I don't like that. You have to rely on other teams to suffer for Penn State to benefit. Control what you can control. Go 11-1. You'll host that playoff game as a 6th or a 7th seed. And then depending on the matchup, right? It's matchup dependent. Ohio State was a mismatch for Penn State because of the line of scrimmage, the offensive line against the defensive line, and Penn State's wide receivers against Ohio State's secondary, and Ohio State's wide receivers against Penn State's secondary. Let's see. I'm losing my spot again in the comments section. So yes, they will make the college football playoff if they go 11-1. Franklin, you can't get it done, brother. Do us all a favor and pack it up. Retire. Go. So I don't know that he would want another coaching job. He's obviously compensated very well, and Penn State is a top 10 brand. It really, there are very other few places that are available that open up that you say, okay, Penn State is not a better spot than XYZ. I have always looked at the Florida job as a potential opening that would be interested in James Franklin. I'm not trying to allude to anything. I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen. But if you're going to look at any job and say, where would James Franklin go other than Penn State? USC was a possibility. I know that USC was at least interested in him. They had him in the top list of candidates. He was ideal for them before they went with Lincoln Riley. That was one. That's not open. Florida would be another one. I think Florida is a realistic destination. But Alabama or Florida State or any of those other ones, I don't think so. Georgia, if it were to, I don't know why it would open up. Kirby Smart, I don't know. It's James Franklin's going to stay at Penn State for quite some time. Let's see, losing my comments here. Chris says the way it looked on TV was that he didn't have full control of the ball. Okay, so we're going back to the Quinshon Judkins fumble. At least he took one step before he was hit. It was a bang-bang play. I mean, that is football, right? Everything's a bang-bang play. The Will Howard fumble through the end zone for a touchback was a bang-bang play. The way I process it in slow motion, Quinshon Judkins catches the football. It is secure, and he's trying to transfer it to have better security. He takes 1-2 steps, spins, and makes a football move. In that moment, to try to embrace the tackler, that is a football move. By definition, you have possession of the football. You transferring it doesn't matter, doesn't mean anything to me. That doesn't matter to me. You caught the football. It's secure, and then he's trying to transfer it to his more secure hand, to the more secure side of his body. He made a football. It's not like he was juggling it. He was bobbling it. He wasn't doing that. Play calls inside the 5. Yikes. And not once, but twice. And it had nothing to do with the play calling. I thought Andy Kotelnicki did he call a perfect game? His perfect games came against West Virginia and USC. Different caliber opponent. I understand that it's easier to call better game plans against those two than Ohio State. But he called a good enough game plan to put Penn State in a position to win. At that point, the players have to execute. It wasn't like the games of old where Penn State would get to the 50-yard line and have to punt. They drove down the field multiple times. They had explosive plays, something they didn't do a season ago. This was not Andy Kotelnicki's fault. Anybody that says that he needs to be fired, or he's not as good of a coordinator as we thought he was, he is a major step up from Mike Yurcich, And could he have called selectively? Like, I think hindsight's 2020. I thought Bo Pribula should have been in the game plan a little more, especially with Drew Aller not being 100%. That wasn't the case. That's fine. But Andy Kotelnicki put Penn State offensively in a position to win. So did Tom Allen. Those coordinators they called a perfect game plan, and it still wasn't good enough. So then what does it go down to? Again, James Franklin can't run the football in from the 5-yard line. Katron Allen, Drew Aller, Tyler Warren, somebody should have. You have 4 plays and you got turned away. And you throw an interception the other time. Until Penn State addresses the wide receiver position, they won't win a big game. This is a year 2 problem. And it's going to, okay, so unlike the NFL, you can't go sign somebody off the street. Unlike the NFL, you can't make a trade. Like, you are stuck with the players that you have based on the transfer portal and the natural attrition of college football. That's where recruiting comes in, right? The class of 2022, why Penn State is in a position to at least contend in the college football playoff is because of a 3-year plan. This is a 3-year process to get them to this point to finish 11-1. Wide receivers is going to be the same thing. So the turning point for Marcus Hagans, cleaned house in year 1, tried to fix things, band-aids, that kind of thing, tried to radically fix things in a quick amount of time, and he couldn't. And now, so a Tyzier Denmark, right? That's going to take time. Tyzier Denmark is not going to take over in year 1 as a freshman. It'd be nice. But how many Jeremiah Smiths are available right out of high school? They're not. That's why everybody's talking about Jeremiah Smith the way he is. Tyzier Denmark is he'll need year 1 to develop. He'll need year 2 to start to show it, and then year 3 to break out. Jahan Dotson took time. Chris Godwin took less time. But he, right? It's select players. It is select players. That's why they're not the standard. They're the exception. So year 3 is a good. I do not sell out on Marcus Hagans. I think he's actually doing a really good job. He's flipped over recruiting, right? It seemed pretty bad in the summer, but now he's getting recruiting right. And Amari Evans is better. Liam Clifford is better. Caden Saunders is hurt. But the receivers are better, even though that they are right. It's a balancing act here, because Penn State is still losing because of the same problems, but they would be 9-3 and 8-4 if they didn't fix these issues. Wide receiver is better. The offensive play calling is better. The offensive line is doing enough. Right, they're fixing the issues from 2023, or at least making them better. Because if they don't, they lose to USC, they lose to West Virginia. But it's not good enough to beat Ohio State, at least not yet. And that's going to take transfer portal and consistent recruiting. Another bronze medal in the Big Ten. Ugh. Yeah, I'm really kind of I'm at a loss for it too. But that's the thing. This doesn't make or break the season at the end of the day. It doesn't make or break the season, because you still have the 12-team playoff. You have the 12-team playoff. Really, is anybody going to care about the Ohio State game if Penn State hosts a home game in the playoffs, wins, and then who knows from there, right? No one's yes. And the only time the Ohio State game is going to matter is the next time they play Ohio State in 2026 at Columbus. It stings. It's not cool. It's not fun. But if Penn State wins a home playoff game, I don't care that they lost to Ohio State in the middle of the season. I really don't. I think that's the end all. If Penn State misses out on that goal, then yes, because of the Ohio State game, that is an issue, because that is one of your hypothetical losses. They would have to lose another game. Hopefully they don't. So I don't see the Ohio State game. I don't care about the Ohio State game if Penn State ends up winning a playoff game or 2. That is that's really the long and short answer of it. Losing my spot in the comments section. Where are we? We'll wrap this up soon. Probably go for about another 10 to 15 minutes here. Franklin has done well turning around a program with such an ugly history. Yes. I'm not going to get into the full discussion of that, but this is true. There were scholarship limits. There were A lot of there, obviously, the perception of Penn State, there were a lot of things that were competing against James Franklin from 2014, 2015. Same thing with Bill O'Brien, right? He dealt with that too, and he left and went off to the NFL, and James Franklin stuck around and pushed through it. And it was a 3-year turnaround for the most part. So James Franklin has done well. That's why, other than legendary coaches that are going to go down in all of history, who do you replace James Franklin with? I don't disagree that that there are better head coaches, but are you going to hire a Nick Saban? Are you going to, do you think Ed Orgeron is the solution there? They also have to be the right fit for Penn State. I'm not just going to get a coach to go get a coach. Pete Carroll would not work out at Penn State. Okay, he's a legendary coach. He's a better coach than James Franklin in terms of actual football head coaching ability, X's and O's. But could he lead a Penn State program better than James Franklin? Probably not. So even if they get into the playoffs, do you have confidence that Franklin can advance this team? Not really. I think they win a home playoff game. The quarterfinal is where it gets interesting because I've named the select teams. If some of the projections had them playing BYU in the quarterfinal. They beat BYU. They beat Miami. But it's Oregon, Georgia, Texas. Let me see if I can pull up the rankings just to kind of get a better idea of. So it's all dependent on. And I think and again, it's not like Penn State is far away. I didn't sit and watch this game and said, "Oh, Penn State can't hang with Ohio State. Penn State can't be a contender with one of the elites." That's not it at all. Let me get the rankings pulled up here so I can just not rattle teams off. Okay, so here's the AP Top 25 before the rankings change here. They'd be an underdog to Oregon. They'd be an underdog to Georgia. They'd be another underdog to Ohio State. I think they'd beat Miami. We saw what Duke did today. Duke gave them a run for their money, and Duke is not that. Manny Diaz is running a nice program down there in year one. That is not a talented Duke team. They're good. They're good, but they're definitely punching above their weight class here. Tennessee would be an interesting one. I think Tennessee would be a slight favorite, maybe a field goal. Notre Dame's that's another interesting one. Texas is there too. I think they'd be an underdog to Texas. So that's kind of that's the tier 2 of teams is Penn State, Tennessee, Notre Dame, Texas A&M. I'd even throw Clemson in there and Alabama. And there's those teams are close. Those teams are all very close. I would love those would be incredible games. At Beaver Stadium in the opening round, in the second round of the college football playoff, those will be some of the best games in history, honestly. Fire Franklin, he's a loser. It unfortunately doesn't solve anything. My main issue is if Penn State gets into the playoffs, can Franklin outcoach the opposing team's coach? The record says no. More often than not, that's the case because they were outcoached in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2021. I mean, that was different 2021 circumstances. But they outcoached Lincoln Riley in 2023 or 2024 this season. Recently, James Franklin and Penn State outcoached an equivalent program. They outcoached Lincoln Riley. Is this being broadcast from your room in your parents' house? No, I do not live with my parents, but thank you. Franklin, the best you can get, better stop with and fire him. It doesn't solve anything. Doesn't solve anything. Wide receiver and linebacker rooms are subpar. Yeah. That's the linebackers haven't, and the offensive lines in that group is in that group as well. There was a lot of optimism for the wide receivers because it was mostly about the play calling. The conversations, the press conferences in the preseason and even in spring ball, right, is that Andy Kotelnicki is going to be able to do enough to scheme the wide receivers open. So you're going to see the best versions of Trey Wallace, Amari Evans, Tyler Warren. And I think that's true. I think that both of these things are true, that Andy Kotelnicki is helping. But when it comes down to it and you're facing a Denzel Burke, Caleb Downs, a Lathan Ransom, these are all insanely talented players. And there's a clear talent gap. Trey Wallace versus Denzel Burke. Denzel Burke's probably going to win that matchup more often than not. 11-1 this season is not next level, Zach. Chances of us winning a playoff game are a toss-up. Stat lines don't say Penn State was close as we may feel they were this afternoon. Well, if they score both times inside the 5, they win, right? 27-20. They left 14 points out on the football field inside the 5-yard line. Warren, who wasn't given the ball after getting them inside the 5, I thought it was weird. I don't, and that was asked to James Franklin. For anybody that missed the full James Franklin press conferences up on the Locked On Nittany Lions YouTube page here. He was asked about that and just kind of gave a non-answer. That I don't know why. They wanted to go to Tyler Warren on 4th and 1, and Ohio State was all over that. That's coaching. That's on Andy Kotelnicki. James Franklin's not calling the plays in that instance. Andy Kotelnicki's the play caller, so he bears responsibility for that. Hey, Franklin, why don't you fire Kotelnicki? Andy Kotelnicki is not the problem. The reason Penn State is where it is because of Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen. Like they are one of the best coordinator duos in the entire country. Franklin pulled off the greatest bank heist in history. He's laughing all the way in the bank. I'm sure he sleeps well at night with his paychecks, right? Dude, the calls in the red zone near the end, awful. I couldn't believe it. He reminded me of high school teams that only pass on 4th down. Ohio State made great plays defensively. That defensive line's the best one that Penn State has ever seen. Like that's the best team that Penn State has seen. That defensive line, Penn State had not been challenged by a front 7 until this point. Ohio State's front 7 is one of the best that Penn State's going to see all season. USC, Illinois, Wisconsin, West Virginia, they're either average or below average. Ohio State's is elite. Signetti. So here's a suggestion. Yeah, Curt Signetti. If James Franklin were to leave or if Penn State wanted to go a different direction and for a head coach. Curt Signetti would be an awesome option. I think that's because only Matt Rule comes to my mind, but that's, again, does Curt Signetti view that as a destination job? That's how I'm viewing that. I do not, because I think of this as men's basketball, but I do not want another situation, or Bill O'Brien, Micah Shrewsbury, where they look at Penn State as a stepping stone. Penn State is a top 10 brand, and I would want, ideally, a coach that looks at it that way, that this is a destination job. That would be kind of interesting. Curt Signetti and Tom Allen, right? Because of the whole Indiana thing. Tom Allen failed where Curt Signetti is. And Curt Signetti is an elite coach. He is one of the current coaches right now that truly wins more with less. James Madison was a powerhouse, and he knows ball. Curt Signetti is objectively one of the best coaches in college football right now. Phil Knight's Oregon, best college football team money can buy. Ohio State too. Ohio State's $20 million. So I'll finish with that actually as we wrap up towards the hour here. Ohio State shouldn't have this team. Ohio State should not have this team. JT Tuimoloau, Denzel Burke, all those guys, Travion Henderson, Emeka Egbuka should be in the NFL. Caleb Downs, Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, right? They just threw whatever amount of money. So everybody says that Oregon is spending ludicrous amounts of money, but so is Ohio State. Penn State's not spending that. Penn State doesn't have that has that NIL kind of money. The alleged difference is $9 million. You can do a lot with $9 million. Because Ohio State should have lost it, and I get it. This is the age that we're in, where you can spend money to get players, and you can get them from the transfer portal. You don't have to recruit them from start to finish. For Ohio State, they have so many impact players that should either be with a different school that they were originally recruited by, like Quinshon Judkins leaving Ole Miss, a Power 4 SEC team to get a raise, allegedly, to play at Ohio State as a second running back, as to split time, to be a co-starter, a timeshare where he is the face of Ole Miss's offense. That's a more complicated situation too, but NIL certainly was a factor there. And then JT Tuimoloau would have been a first-round pick. What player before NIL in football history said, I'm a first-round pick, but I'm going to come back to college football because of XYZ? Find me a player. Anybody that is a first-round pick always goes to the NFL. So JTT, Denzel Burke, Emeka Egbuka, if it wasn't for Ohio State shelling out as much NIL as they did, those guys would be off to the NFL. Quinshon Judkins wouldn't have left a Power 4 school. Same thing with Will Howard. Ohio State maximized what it had available to them. But they built this team the way that they did. How far does Penn State fall in the top 25? Depends on results. I would say they're still inside the top 10. Again, they lost to number 4 Ohio State by 1 touchdown. They lost by 7 to the number 4 team in the country. I would say 8th or 9th. See what other comments we have. A lot of people like Kurt Cignetti. That's what I'm seeing here. You think you can beat Clemson? I said the teams were close. I didn't say that Penn State would be an overwhelming favorite. I think Clemson's a good team. I think they lost to Georgia 34-3. So I'd take Drew Aller over Cade Klubnik. Oh, I'm out of breath, honestly. I'm out of breath. Penn State can finish 11-1. They can go to the college football playoff. They can win the opening round. They're in that tier of Clemson, Notre Dame, Tennessee. I think they'd beat a Miami. It's the line is drawn at Oregon, Georgia, and now clearly Ohio State. But the gap is not wide, and I get that. Wins and losses are what matters at the end of the day, not moral victories of, oh, well, they're closer. No, they still lost. Appreciate everyone for tuning in to this live edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate your comments, your feedback, your questions, and everything in between. We'll have more episodes recapping Penn State versus Ohio State, talking some men's basketball, some wrestling upcoming this week as well. For all your favorite Penn State sports teams, whether it is football, whether it is wrestling, whether it is men's basketball, we'll discuss it all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.